Google did not break Bitcoin, but Google may have started with their paper the countdown for every institution building on classical crypto rails. The first quantum crypto attack will not look like malware or smart contract exploit or even a phishing link. It will be a valid signature, a valid transaction, valid withdrawal, valid mint, and valid consensus settlement. And this is exactly what makes it dangerous. Because today, more than 300 trillions in securities, deposits, fund infrastructures are actively moving towards digital rails. Out of those, 317 billion in stablecoins and more than 36 billion in tokenized real-world assets already sit on vulnerable blockchain infrastructure. Most of that infrastructure still depends on vulnerable classic signatures. So Bitcoin uses a CCP256K1 curve, Ethereum uses same one, also BLS and KZG, all vulnerable cryptography, Solana and Stellar use elliptic curves, Ripple use elliptic curves, and the wider internet is already moving out of. Cloudflare has reported that more than half of human-wide traffic is already post-quantum encrypted, but blockchains are still stalling and are still discussing whether they still need post-quantum. The internet needs post-quantum key exchange, but blockchains need not just post-quantum signatures that say ownership, but also all of the cryptography that we have built on top of them for consensus and all the other applications. So the question is not just, will tokenization happen? The question is, will the 300 trillion of tokenization settle on cryptography that is already scheduled for retirement?
Yeah, thanks for this last line, Daria. I think this is the key line here. Like, the question is exactly, will the next 300 trillion settle on the cryptography, which is already scheduled for retirement in 2030 by NIST? BlackRock has just now published the Quantum Computing and Blockchains report. The Google Quantum AI has released the new numbers for attacking the ECDLP 256, the elliptic curve problem behind Bitcoin and Ethereum style signatures. Justin Drake from the Ethereum Foundation has said that there was a day that he found to be crazy quantum story that just got wilder for him. And Visa's Jack has said that AI is transforming the front end of the commerce and stable coins are reshaping the back end of the e-commerce. So now we have a couple of elements, Daria. One is AI agents, everybody knows, stable coins, tokenized settlement, and quantum risk. They are all coming together in the same story. Is this all still a theory, Daria, or has post-quantum risk become a board level financial infrastructure issue today?
So it is already moving into board level infrastructure issue. It's not a science math problem anymore. Of course, today there is no cryptography relevant quantum computer that is operationally breaking Bitcoin and Ethereum as of now. But institutional risks horizon do not begin when the attack actually happens. Institutional risks begin when migration may take longer than the threat timeline. So Will Su from BlackRock, Inish Crescent, Robert Mitnick have all put it clearly that quantum computing is likely a manageable risk for blockchains, but it is subject to industry's ability to move swiftly and upgrade proactively. So manageable does not mean that you can ignore it. If banks, custodians, stablecoin issuers, tokenized funds, exchanges, bridges, validator network, all of it needs to migrate, not just the protocol and every single key that's already operationally done by anybody who's using the chain, that may take 3 to 7 years to migrate. So 2029, which is the timelines that Google have set for cryptographically learned quantum computer, is not early. It's very tight. It is less than 3 years now. It is a very serious planning window that needs to be addressed today. So for institutions that are aligned to NIST cryptographic deprecation timeline, the diligence clock has already started. And if the whole market outside of Web3, I'm saying Google, Cloudflare, Apple, Signal, are already moving to deprecate elliptic curves, that federal agencies are moving to deprecate elliptic curves, then blockchains that stay on the old cryptography are risking becoming a supply chain risk, regardless of whether a quantum computer exists or not. NIST is not going to walk back their timelines one day and say, oh, you know what, let's return to elliptic curves Never gonna happen.
Yeah, Daria, I think this is exactly a great point. What you are basically saying is that migration is a bigger problem, and this was also addressed in the BlackRock report, and we at EternaX have been calling this term, and we have defined this term, to be honest, like we defined the migration debt problem, and we called it way back, I think 3-4 months back itself, in EternaX report which was released, where the specific term was migration debt, and that is what exactly BlackRock is telling now, that it's a big problem. And we at EternaX area, we already have the solution that you can go post quantum native today. We'll discuss that in the later questions. But for now, migration debt is a very big problem, and they need to consider a lot of things. Google Story, Daria, is a hook. And when I speak to some people, they say Bitcoin is broken, but while others have a perspective that nothing matters until the hardware is existing, and tell me where the hardware is. So what did exactly Google show?
So obviously, no, Google did not break Bitcoin because you would actually need quantum hardware for that, but they have compressed the attack curve. So basically, they have lowered a lot, and then subsequent developments have lowered it even more. How much qubits and how much steps of the Shor's algorithm you actually need to be able to break elliptic curve DLP, discrete logarithm. The Google Quantum AI paper that went out in the end of March, co-authored by a lot of big names in the industry, including Dan Boneh, Justin Drake, Craig Gidney, and a lot of others, gave new estimates on attacking the elliptic curves. So the curves are the ones that are used in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and similar to the other ones. The numbers are currently that it would take fewer than 1,200 logical qubits and around 90 million Toffoli gates. Then there is another estimates that are like less Toffoli gates, so 70 million, but more qubits. You can balance those numbers. The qubits came out to 1,450. So under Google's assumptions, that translates to about 500,000 physical qubits running in just a few minutes. So it's exactly the time that it takes to mine a Bitcoin block. That basically means that nothing is safe on Bitcoin, not just the keys that are not exposed, but when you send the transaction, if it's a sufficiently high value, quantum computer will be able to break it between the time you send it and the block is mined and basically front run you. So this Google paper basically shows 20 times reduction versus prior physical qubit estimates. And those prior estimates are only like a few months old. So this is actually moving very, very fast. So it's not just a small improvement, it's a serious timeline compression. So Google's paper says that it wants to raise awareness on this issue and convince people to kind of start moving, including need for blockchains to start transitioning and researching post-quantum cryptography. And given already a couple of months passed, we can say that this actually would happened. A lot more people started to pay attention to this issue. The interesting thing about the paper is that the disclosure method that they used was just as important. They used the zero knowledge proof without showing the actual algorithm improvements that they did, but to prove that they have achieved the certain numbers of qubits and gates. So they provided kind of not the blueprint of the bomb, but kind of the proof that they have the bomb. Justin Drake obviously called the paper bombshell, which is very suitable. And the ZK disclosure is basically first historical usage of such an artifact. However, that did not like stay long. The people, there is a French researcher, André Schrottenloher, that has kind of reversed engineered. He did not break the ZK proof. He basically independently reinvented a similar circuit that was even slightly more efficient, between like 1% to 10% in terms of qubits and Toffoli gates. And then basically the madness started. Once he published that paper, bunch of people from like Eigenlayer team and other teams, it was a very open source competition. The website is ECDSA.fail. Basically, a bunch of people pointed their AI agents and also like their hands and heads to try to optimize the circuit, because it's at this point literally just software that is being optimized, the software of the breaking of the elliptic curve, not the actual quantum computer. And agents, as we know, are really good at software. So they are now already like 44% better than what Google has published. So Google did this whole thing about responsible disclosure and that they don't want to publish this thing because it's a ZK and it's very, very dangerous. Took 2 months for the scientific community to reverse engineer it. And agents have, within a week, improved it 40%. So the threat model has changed a lot in the past 2 months. The AI does not need to build a quantum computer, that's going to be done. But the AI is pushing the curve from the algorithmic side of things. It reduces the circuit costs enough that the required quantum computer is smaller. So it can arrive earlier and it's easier to like actually run like physically on hardware. So institutions are not just tracking the hardware improvements in terms of qubits, but also algorithmic compression. And those distance between these two is getting uncomfortably small.
Yeah. I mean, this is very relevant, Arya. What you are saying here is that algorithmic compression has also come up very blatantly in the picture. And what exactly has happened is that what you are projecting is that when we checked this last when this started on day one, the development above the Google's unpublished breakthrough was only 10% improvement, and it is a continuous improvement. And today when we check the numbers, the number has gone to 80% improvement above the Google's breakthrough. Essentially what you are trying to say is that AI has improved the algorithm 80% by within just, I would say, 2 weeks. And with that, what you're saying is, say, imagine there is a lot of qubits requirement at the end of the crypto computing hardware, and now there can be a time where the hardware and the algorithmic compression becomes so much that the current hardware given within 1 year 2 year or whatever, we can't say that number, but essentially there can be a time where they converge and they meet. And so saying even 2029, which is Google themselves have projected. And by the way, when we are saying, and Google has projected 2029, that does not mean that Google has not transitioned anything. Google is already moving. Cloudflare has already moved 60 to 70% in post quantum just by today. So it's not that they are not moving, they just have some deadline, clear deadline for themselves, that 100% of things have to be completed. I mean, we I would say that we cannot safely say that 2029 even is a good timeline, and because there's a lot of money that is sitting in crypto, so crypto naturally becomes a big home for quantum computing, hacking, and algorithmic based improvements. So that's a very big question, Daria, and institutions should definitely track the quantum hardware and should also track the algorithmic compression along with that. So this I would want you to make this concrete, Daria. When you are saying quantum threats threatens crypto, what exactly breaks? A stablecoin has mint keys, a tokenized fund has admin keys, a custodian has MPC workflows, and Ethereum has validator, Bitcoin has old wallets and exposed public keys. So where does the attack land first, Daria?
All of the above. The attack lands on the curves at the signature layer, and the signatures are pervasive on the chains that use elliptic curves, which is almost all of them and all of the top chains. They are not secured by like regulation or by like, oh, but it's legal to hack. That's not going to work. They are secured by math, and that math is currently becoming vulnerable to quantum computer. That's signatures. So a quantum capable attacker does not need to hack the smart contract, or they don't need to like phish or do any social sort of attacks. They just can look on chain on everything that has been recorded publicly and openly on chain so far, take the public key and walk it back to your private key. That affects Bitcoin wallets, Ethereum consensus validators, Solana, Stellar accounts, Ripple accounts, Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, Avalanche, BNB, all of them use very classical elliptic curve signing. All of that, just considering accounts and validators, also has now higher level institutional control risks. That is the mint keys to stablecoins. So to make you a difference, it's not just one key that controls your own funds, how much many dollars you can have there. It's a key that can mint stablecoins that are not backed by anything out of thin air. Okay, but it can burn. There is tokenized fund admin keys that can make assets appear out of thin air or destroy them. It's bridge signers that can also make assets disappear. It's keys to oracles that say what is true and what is not from the point of view of the chains. It's exchange wallets that have a lot of funds sitting on them. It's custody withdrawal approvals. It's governance upgrade keys. It's very, very complicated for people who are using all of these different mechanisms to change them one by one, and they still depend on the protocol team that they're sitting on to do that first. So the institutions have to remember that a quantum attack will not just fail signature verification, it will pass signature verification. So there is no really way to kind of protect it in runtime unless you have upgraded before it appears. So the custodians would see a very valid transaction, a chain would see a valid transaction, but just the owner is not longer the original owner, is somebody who just walked back the mess. So that's why in EternaX we have focused on post-quantum settlement fully end-to-end, not just like account wallet security, because settlement is where the ownership becomes final and you have to have every single gear secure.
Yeah, got it, Dari. I think this is exactly very important for institutions to understand that, you know, in terms of chains, if you see there is a lot of activity on, Ethereum, there's Stellar, and then there is Canton, and none of them are, post quantum safe, and they still have the risk of migration debt. And also one important point that you pointed out here was custody with the MPCs. And if I remember, we were, doing certain research around this, and we understood that, MPC is not just possible with, these post quantum signatures, which are hash based. Basically, the most conservative scheme, which is the hash based scheme, that is the Sphinx, it's just not possible. And this is a big concern because institutions are requesting for the most conservative post quantum scheme for even migration or, one issuance. And this is very critical because the quantum attack, nobody can be able to stop it, because it will look like, a valid transaction to any chain, any custodian, to any oracle and any stablecoin. So they would approve it right away. And so today what you are seeing with Drift or with KERBDAO or with the Humanity Protocol, the attacks were done with social engineering. Somebody had to steal something, or somebody had to take some private keys. Somehow they had to hack into it. But with post-quantum world, I think there is no need. Somebody sitting in a remote, with a laptop can do these things if the address is visible. So, I mean, this is great focus point, Daria. I would really want you to come to the institutional exposure here, Daria, because this is the key importance today, where tokenization is becoming very important and stablecoin is becoming very important, and these are the institutional products which are exposed. What are those, and which institutions are doing things which are exposed today, and they should take note of it?
So there is a lot of assets already exposed on existing live chains. For example, BlackRock's and securitized BitGo is sitting at about 2.5 billion on Ethereum and multi-chain infrastructure. Then there is Franklin Templeton's Benji and other programs that are spending around 800 million on 9 different chains like Stellar, Polygon, Arbitrum, Avalanche, and others. WisdomTree is also sitting at around 950 million on Stellar and Ethereum. There's Circle and Hashnode sitting around 300 million on chains like Base, Canton, Ethereum, Near, and Solana. Superstate is sitting at about 1 billion touching Ethereum, Solana. JPMorgan Kinexus is kind of their own infra. They have processed more than 1.5 trillion on this private bank-led DLT, which is still not as quantum safe. Broadridge in their own distributed ledger repo have processed 7 trillion in just May, with like average daily volume being 360 billion, up to 200% year over year. It's not just like pilots or some tokenization plans. It's already tokenized settlement that is operating at scale of capital markets. So digital asset, which are the issuer or the creators of the Canton network, have raised 350 million to scale the network as infrastructure for regulated capital markets. So their ecosystem is about like 700 different participants, and it's a lot of institutions like Apollo, BNP Paribas, Citadel, Broadridge, Coinbase Ventures, HSBC, a lot of them all connected to like one intra-institutional framework. Ripple is also RLUSD is on Ripple, which is Ethereum style elliptic curves, Rails, PayPal, Paxos, Goldman Sachs, Standard Chartered. All of them are having responsibility over institutional assets that are deriving their value from outside of the chain, but inheriting the security risks of the chains that are using for distributions. So the wrappers are regulated and the names are very brand, they're very reputable and very credible, but the tech is now vulnerable. And that is the gap they're going to have to cover if they want to keep their reputation and if they want to keep the responsibility of the assets that they have issued.
Got it, Daria. So what basically you're saying here is that there is BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, WisdomTree, Circle, Hashnote, Superstate, JPMorgan, Broadridge, Canton Network, PayPal, Goldman Sachs, BNY, State Street, Standard Chartered, OKX, DTCC, Galaxy, Ondo, and all these they have the institutional assets. Their wrappers are regulated, but their partners are credible, but the rails are still not PQ safe, and that's like trillions of dollars that you yourself mentioned is moving on them, and they are moving it in the tokenization world today, and they want to bring more of $300 trillion of assets on these rails which have an expiry, and it's a big problem for them. I think this is very this is very alarming, and this is very relevant for every institution to understand where are these developments happening and how fast they need to move, and whether they can choose to go PQ native day one with EternaX, that is today, and not bother about the security concern that is creating so much problems. MPC, Daria, I think we discussed this long, before also in this chat, that a lot of institutions will say that we use Fireblocks, Copper, BitGo, Anchorage Digital, Cobo, Dfns, Fordefi, Zodia, Ripple, and whatever, and we use MPC and we are safe. So we should not bother about this. It is more of a job of the custodians at the chain level and things like that. So is MPC custody, Daria, really safe today? Is it really post-quantum safe?
So there is kind of two models of custody. It's like hardware-based and computational MPC-based. And the problem that computational MPC-based custody is not automatically post-quantum safe. Neither is hardware, but hardware is easier to upgrade. MPC is a really good operational layer of security on top of the signature. It distributes the signing authority, helps with like approvals, policy engines, various treasury controls. You can make it very complicated. It controls like recovery issuance, governance for all these institutions, but it does not change the signature scheme that lies at the bottom of it, that the blockchain actually verifies. And that is still elliptic curves as of today. And the market scale of it is massive. If you just take like the top 15 institutional MPC providers that are like in the report that we published just today, these providers collectively protect more than 10 trillion in digital assets, and they process more than 50 billion in monthly volume. Out of those, Fireblock alone has about 10 trillion. Okay, there is Copper, there is BitGo, there is Zodia. All of them are basing themselves on computational MPC. But if that MPC settles on like Ethereum, Bitcoin, or any other elliptic curve chain like Solana, Polygon, Avalanche, or Stellar, or Ripple, still the chain level signature is vulnerable. So the key compromise is already the dominant attack pattern. For MPC, you need to compromise more than one key, but it's still the same quantum vulnerable chain. So In all of this phishing and social engineering hacks that have happened in the last year and this year are also kind of not going to be even needed if you have a quantum computer. You just grab the key and you just do it. And the problem there is that they cannot that easily migrate because all of their business model basically depends on elliptic curve mass, and there is no practical post-quantum alternatives to that at all.
This is basically, this is very important from the side of that, even these guys, it was very easy for these MPC providers to use ECDSA, and it made their lives very easy. And now there is a new challenge for them. And the challenge is that the post quantum signatures are very big, and we'll come to that next to that in next question, Daria, where what is exactly the problem with the the MPC in terms of the technical structure. But the critical question is that do they have any chain? Because you can have the MPC, which is, or you can have the HSM or a hardware wallet which is post quantum safe today, but you need a simultaneous a chain also to have the post quantum security. So you need both the things to come together, and that's what we offer at Ethereum. That's what we are offering at EternaX, and that is the hash based, Sphinx based, post quantum safe layer 1, where you can issue your tokens, your tokenized assets day 1 PQ native, and you also have an MPC with a provider which is post quantum safe with the most conservative scheme, which is Sphinx hash based scheme. So this moves to the next question, Daria. There is a issue with Sphinx or hash based, or I can say SLH DSA, which is FIPS 205, the NIST approved scheme, and it's the most conservative scheme which even Ethereum has accepted to be using in their migration 4 to 5 years from here. So why can't every MPC provider just threshold sign with the Sphinx? What is the problem?
Well, the problem there is obviously what makes Sphinx or SLHDSA, the way it was standardized by NIST, secure is because it's hash based, which is exactly what makes it not algebraically MPC computable. You could do kind of threshold in terms of like, oh, if you need 5 people to sign, you just use 5 Sphinx signatures and you just list them and you count them one by one. But that's an enormous amount of bytes. Because what makes Sphinx attractive for conservative institutions is because it's hash based and it has very, very conservative security profile. It doesn't depend on any of like novel-ish assumptions like lattices that have algebraic structures, but MPC works best where the signing algorithm has algebraic structure. It can be efficiently split across participants. So ECDSA has that structure and it's also very, very small, but Sphinx SLHDSA does not. For example, like if you compare like typical elliptic curves, signatures are 64, 65 bytes. MLDSA, Delirium, which is a lattice-based one, is already like 40 times larger. But SLHDSA, the NIST version of Sphinx that was standardized, starts at 7 kilobytes up to 50 kilobytes, depending on what the variant that you choose. And this is about like what 122 times larger than signatures on today's chains, and EternaX is basically compressing it to a 160 byte permanent settlement record, which is what then matters for the scalability and the high performance of all of it. The compute overhead in signing with like Delirium MLDSA is about 8 to 15 times slower, but SLHDSA can be from 12 to 50 times slower than elliptic curves. So for custody may not appear that much because it's a rare, usually, operations. But you need to be able to have MPC, which are computing arbitrary operations, not just counting how many people sign, which is not possible with hash-based ones. So you need some sort of algebraic thing there. But for blockchains, this compute and size and data overhead affects fees, mempool, it affects block capacity, it affects validator hardware, storage, latency, blah, 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 blah. So none of the chains that exist today that would just go and upgrade blindly to a signature. And we've seen a handful of this newer quantum chains that what the only thing they did is just upgrade elliptic curve to like dilithium. They are going to run at 10 TPS. We are targeting high performance upwards of 50,000 TPS with sub-second finality. So the PQ overhead for us, the reduction from like ECDSA baseline would be just 2%, while naive post-quantum chains that would retrofit are losing upwards of 80%. So it's modeled on Solana testnet was 90%, which is like public in their materials. So what institutions are now facing is, do they want to stay MPC compatible with classical signature and risk being quantum exposed, or do they want to move to conservative hash-based post-quantum security, but lose basically the post-quantum current MPC custody model? So we will be also releasing something next week, how we've designed to avoid that false choice and keep the same custody workflows thanks to our compression core on chain.
Got it, Daria. So I think the problem that you are highlighting here is very very basic, that which is again the problem also with the blockchains as well, that the signatures are very big, and the signature suddenly from ECDSA to hash based is 1 to x bigger in sizes, and this is a very big problem for any chain like Solana, Canton, or Ethereum. Solana is losing 90%, that is already claimed by them. Canton is using 88% of the performance, and Ethereum is losing roughly 84% of the performance. And this is all happening with their current discussions and what they have listed out publicly. So this is a critical situation, Daria. You took all this information, you did all the analysis, and this month or the last month you had a couple of trips, which was one Eurocrypt, which is the most renowned cryptography conference in Rome, and Proof of Talk in Paris. Eurocrypt, deeply cryptography based. You met Dan Boneh and Justin Drake as well, and you met these individuals there. And Proof of Talk was largely institutional, where you met Franklin Templeton, you met JPMorgan and Standard Chartered, and all these individuals from the capital markets who were very interested in the future of crypto and the future of the rails. So what did these 2 rooms tell you, Daria? What do you say your experience was?
Right. So at Eurocrypt in Rome, a lot of cryptographers, for them, post-quantum was top of mind, because we already have kind of post-quantum building blocks out of signatures, but we didn't have everything that's on top. We didn't have efficient post-quantum ZK, we didn't have efficient post-quantum MPC, thresholds, privacy, all of the things like that are heavy in the research. They need to be worked on, they need to be implemented, they need to be peer-reviewed, all of that. So people were worried because they know implementation takes time, assumptions, analysis takes time, reductions, attacks. The signature silences are not efficient, the proof systems are not efficient. Implementation security takes time to be long-term, robust. But then in Proof of Talk is mostly institutional finance conference, and people were discussing accelerating tokenization of everything coming on chain. So like collateral, liquidity, regulation, credits, lending, DeFi for institutions, and like market structures. But they are not connected enough to what was discussed at Eurocrypt. So cryptography academic community knows that migration is going to be hard, and we are going to need to be rebuilding a lot of our systems. And institutional crypto community is saying, okay, we are accelerating our tokenization, but the market has not yet priced the bridge between those two facts. Some people think, oh, we're just going to continue using MPC, but they're not aware that there is no post-quantum MPC today, so MPC does not solve it. Permission blockchains do not mean they're quantum safe. Private ledgers are not also post-quantum safe. So permission does not mean post-quantum, private does not mean post-quantum, regulated does not mean post-quantum. The only post-quantum cryptography means post-quantum, and they are going to come to that.
Got it. I think this is something you nailed it very correctly. That only post quantum cryptography means post quantum. And post quantum cryptography standards, signature standards, have been published by NIST in 2024. One of those standards is Sphinx, which is SLH DSA, and FIPS 205. And this is something which we already have implemented at EternaX. So you don't have to go out and search for the best conservative solution out there. It is already existing. It is EternaX with the most conservative PQ scheme. And so do not pretend we use MPC and that solves it. Do not pretend permissioned means quantum safe. Do not pretend private ledger means post quantum. So coming to the last question, Daria, which is why EternaX? And the last question, this is key, and we will have to hear this question. We'll have to answer this question thousands of times. And the question is, why EternaX? Why not wait for Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, Canton, Stellar, or custody providers to solve this? Why even go PQ native day one? Why is it all the chaos? What is the offering here, Daria?
Because retrofitting post-quantum security onto existing rail is a lot harder than just a signature swap. It's not just a protocol migration. It's a different transaction format. It's a different account models, which means every single user and every single app, single wallet, custody integration, all of that needs to one by one change their formats. It affects also validator signatures. It affects all of the consensus, bridges, block space, performance, governance. All of it just falls brick by brick. It affects compliance. It affects even legal finality. So existing chains that have massive ecosystems is, yes, their network affects strengths, but it's also their biggest risk. It's also what makes migration slow. It puts responsibility into hands of every single user and institution that have released on those chains to perform their own migration operationally correctly, and it's a complicated thing to do. And if you make a mistake, there is no way back. So at EternaX, what we started was the institutional requirement to have post-quantum native settlement, to have custody provider compatibility for stablecoin issuance, for tokenized asset workflows, to have auditable institutional controls at high performance, to have the most conservative hash-based security from the very beginning at high performance. The key idea is simple, is to not force institutions to choose between security and performance. We separate custody and transaction authorization from post-quantum authentication at the protocol layer, which lets us keep both very conservative security profile and very high performance. So institutions keep their custody workflows and their compliance and all of that reporting. They keep their policy engines, but the settlement rail enforces hash-based post-quantum security from day one. So everything that you have issued on a post-quantum native settlement rail like EternaX, you don't have to think about it anymore. You do not have to migrate it next year or in 5 years. So it's not just a simple wallet feature, account abstraction, swap, or a plugin or a patch. It's a complete redesign of the settlement layer from the grounds up to keep the most conservative security profile and high performance.
Yeah, Daria, I think this is absolutely the most value generating engine in today's time, because as also quoted by BlackRock report, that there is a greater value to be generated because this is the biggest friction point in the history of finance, and this is one of the biggest situations which we are solving for, and biggest problem that we are solving for in finance. And as you have highlighted, in the age of AI, where the attack algorithmic compression is increasing, it is highly critical and highly relevant for all the DeFi, all the chains to be security, I would say, prepared and vigilant and agile in terms of to protect from whatever is coming in the future. So I'll quickly wrap it up, Daria, what we have discussed as in the recap. And the message is basically clear. The quantum risk is not about fear, it is about timing. There is no quantum computer that is breaking Bitcoin or Ethereum today. But the institutions do not start migration on Q day. There is no Independence Day or Q day kind of announcement that is going to happen. By then, the custody review, governance vote, compliance approval, smart contract migration, key rotation, bridge redesign, validator upgrade, exchange coordination, auditor review, and regulator conversation are already late. The first quantum crypto attack will not say I am an attack. It will say I am a valid signature, I am a valid transaction, I am a valid withdrawal, I am a valid mint, I am a valid settlement. And that is why EternaX exists today. Post-quantum readiness is not a cybersecurity. It is a custody strategy. It is a stablecoin strategy. It is a tokenization strategy. It is a settlement strategy. It is a distribution strategy. Institutions that migrate first will not just be safer, they will own the trust layer of the next market cycle. So this is Parth, the co-founder EternaX, and Daria, the co-founder of EternaX, and this is EternaX. We are EternaX. So the post-quantum settlement layer for institutional crypto, stable coins, tokenized assets, custody, and market infrastructure, because the next 300 trillion should not settle on yesterday's cryptography. Thanks everyone for connecting with us. Looking forward to you on our next podcast.
Thank you, and see you in the next episodes of The Control Loop.